Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to the last part of our Oath of the Gatewatch set review. If you missed the first 5 parts, they are on a playlist. Feel free to check those out. But today we're going to look at all the colorless cards in the set. That includes not only the colorless Eldrazi's and spells, but also your artifacts and your lands. Tomorrow we'll be back with a pre-release primer, and we're also going to look at the expeditions in that video tomorrow, since they aren't technically part of the set, but they are playable in your limited environment. So having said that, let's jump into the cards. First, we have Deceiver of Form, and I like this card a lot in limited. Now, I said in the last video quite a bit, there's a lot of competition at the 6, the 7, the 8 level for Eldrazi's and even some big creatures. So you do have to make some choices sometimes, especially in your seal pool, what you want to be your ending big bomb creatures at the top of your curve. This one's a fine one. It's an 8/8. It doesn't have evasion, but it costs 7. And if you're going wide, let's say I have some Eldrazi tokens, maybe I ramped and I have some left over that I don't need, or I'm playing with some allied synergies and I have a few small creatures out on the board, I can flip a card and those creatures can get big for a turn and copy maybe some of my creatures with evasion or something like that in my deck. That's very, very interesting. Now, it's very inconsistent, so it's not always going to work out for you, and it's not going to work out sometimes the time you need it to work out. But when it doesn't work out, you still have an 8/8 on the board. That's not the end of the world by any means. So this is a fine card, definitely very limited playable. Eldrazi Mimic. Here's one that was a little controversial, I think, when it was spoiled. Some people really like it, some people really hate it. The downside is, of course, it doesn't have evasion, and it's a 2/1, but the upside is it's a 2 casting cost, so it's pretty cheap, and once in a while you might hit something big, and when you do, it gets a boost, but it doesn't have evasion. Well, here's my thought on it. It's a 2-drop. You're paying 2 for it. You're not investing all your mana by any means. So if I'm looking for a 2-drop, this is just as good of a 2-drop as any. And if I get a 2/1 out of it and that's all it is, well, okay, fine. Maybe I traded with another creature that's a 2/1 or something wonderful. If I get lucky and later in the game I'm able to hit something big and I can get in for some damage or make my opponent chump block with some of their creatures, well, I just got way more value out of this 2-drop than probably any other 2-drop that I could have played. Now, it's a rare, you're not going to see this all the time, obviously, but when you do see it, it's going to be a real fine 2-drop for you. I think a lot of times when people evaluate cards, they don't take into account that you really need to be building a mana curve. And yeah, this would be horrible if this was an 8 casting cost card, but at a 2 spot, this is some pretty good stuff for limited. So keep that in mind, and you'll be happy, I think, if you play this one in your limited build. Next is Endbringer, and I like this one a lot. It's a 5/5, so it's not super big compared to some of them, but it untaps on your opponent's untap step too. So you keep untapping this thing, you can attack with it, it untaps, and even if you can't get across with an attack, you can ping with it. And if you have dedicated colorless mana, then you can start doing some other hijinks, like maybe drawing some cards, and perhaps making some creatures not being able to attack or block. It just does a whole lot of interesting things. Having said that, this is going to be a good card for you in limited, even if you don't have a lot of extra colorless mana lying around. As long as you can cast this with some consistency by turn 6, I would feel fine playing it, even if I'm just using the 5/5 body and pinging with it periodically. It's still pretty decent. This is really going to shine in like Commander, though. Like, could you imagine playing this in Commander? Every turn it untaps, and you can maybe draw a card, or maybe you can just mess around with your opponents by making things not be able to attack and block, and maybe winning some favor from some other players by protecting them, by keeping other things from attacking them. Very interesting card. Can play the political game, so I think it'll be cool in Commander. Kozilek's Pathfinder. So this one, not super great if you don't have some colorless mana to back it up. You don't necessarily want to be playing a 5/5 for 6 in this set, because there's just a lot of good options. But if you have a consistent base of colorless mana, this is real good. And if you got that, play it. If you don't have it, then probably want to avoid this one in limited. As far as standard goes, I wouldn't even be completely shocked if this made it into an Eldrazi ramp deck as kind of a mid-game play, especially if they have a lot of colorless mana to kind of back it up. So keep an eye on it. It's a big creature. It's a 5/5. It does block Siege Rhino, so that's the thing. Kozilek, the Great Distortion. So, of course, this was kind of the centerpiece card of the set, much like Ulamog was for the previous one. And, yeah, as you can imagine, this is a powerhouse. I mean, there's no getting around this thing. It's mythic. You get 12/12, creature with menace. But maybe most importantly, you get to draw cards up to 7 if you don't have 7 cards in your hand. So you get card advantage off it, too. It's almost like a little Gristlebrand Jr. sort of. Maybe not quite that good, obviously. But then it also has the ability to perhaps, albeit inconsistently, but sometimes counter spells. There's just a lot happening here. So if you can play this thing and you have the means to get the 2 dedicated colorless and get up to 10 mana, go ahead and go for it. Again, you're going to want some ramp elements to get there if you're going to do this in limited. But if you can do it, go for it. Is it good enough to make it into some standard ramp deck? Yeah, I think so. It's just doing so much, especially with the card draw. I think that might push it over the edge. And aside from that, this is going to be a card that sees commander play. It's going to be awesome in cubes. It's just going to be very, very versatile. Could it even get into maybe some Tron decks in Modern? I don't know. I mean, maybe. Tron just seems like it has so many great targets to choose from. But I did see some Tron decks using Ulamog. And if they used Ulamog, I feel like they can probably use this as well. So keep an eye on it. I think this is going to see a lot of play in a lot of different places. Matter Reshaper. Again, if you can get the colorless mana and you can get it early, then this is a good limited play for you. The fact that you're getting a 3/2 is just fine, but when it does die, it replaces itself either with a card or by putting a permanent right onto the battlefield. So it's pretty decent for you. You get some value out of it. I wouldn't hesitate playing it as long as I felt like I could cast it early on. Next is Reality Smasher, and I like this one a lot. 5/5 body, only costs 5, but it has trample and haste, so you can attack in on turn 4 with this. That's actually kind of awesome. And if your opponent has to get rid of it, which they more than likely will have to, then they're also discarding a card to use the removal spell. So you get a little bit of card advantage off the thing too. I really like this a lot. I think it's enough value to perhaps see some play in the standard ramp deck, so keep an eye on it there. But yeah, it's going to do work for you in limited as well. Again, you just have to make sure you have the colorless mana consistent enough to cast this. Spatial Contortion. I like the name of that. And the art on this is interesting too. There's a lot happening here. But this is cool. This is a 2 casting cost instant. Again, make sure you have that colorless mana. That's the whole thing. And it's hard to say right now how easy or hard that's going to be. It's very hard to say how much colorless mana needs to be in a limited deck to play a card on turn 2 or play a card on turn 3 that's asking for colorless mana. I think we'll all become experts at that very soon, but right now that's still a question mark. Having said that, though, this is still very good removal for small creatures, and it can also do some pump hijinks at the end of the game if you need it to. But bottom line is, I think it's good enough to see some standard play, and it's going to be fine for you most of the time in limited. Thought Not Seer. So more very economical casting costs here. This time you get a 4/4 for 4. That's just fine. And on top of that, you get a Thoughtseize effect when it comes into play. The downside is when it dies, then, or leaves the battlefield, I should say, then at that point your opponent does get to draw a card, but that's still okay because you did get to hopefully pick out their most important spell and take it away the first time around. So that's good, and it has a decent sized body for the casting cost. I'm on board. Again, just depends on how easy your deck can cast colorless spells. Walker of the Wastes. This one's a little middle of the road. If you draft a lot of wastes, yeah, it's going to be a cool card for you. You'll be happy to play it in limited. If you don't have wastes in your sealed pool, playing a 5 casting cost 4/4 with trample is okay, but there's also so many really crazy things you'll be doing at the 5-drop slot, so it might not always make your cut in that case. So it's a little situational, but sometimes it'll be good, sometimes it won't be quite as great. Warden of Geometries. This feels a little expensive. I mean, you're paying 4 for a 2/3 with Vigilance. However, you're getting something very special out of it, and that's dedicated colorless mana. Some decks are just going to be really desperate and need that, I think, especially in Sealed. So keep an eye on this as a mana source in Sealed. Other than that, if you don't need the mana source, or if you have better ones out there, then this isn't quite as good. Warping Whale. So here's another cheap spell. Again, have to take into account it's looking for some dedicated colorless. But this does a lot of work. I love choose 1, choose 2 spells. You can give me those all day and I'll be happy. And here's the thing that pushes this one over the edge for me. The first choice there, exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. That does take care of Jace, which is an issue for a lot of decks. So watch out for this as at least a standard sideboard card, quite honestly. And this will do some work for you in limited too, just because it's so versatile. All right, let's move on to the artifacts. We start off with some equipment here. Bone Saw. This is actually a reprint from Conflux. Didn't do a whole lot back in those days. However, it does something a little special in this set. It's a 0 casting cost spell, which means it enables Surge very well. And there's also a few cards, 2 in white, 1 in red, and 1 Boros card that play well with equipment. So if you happen to have a bunch of those cards on hand, then all these equipment spells become maybe just a little better, if nothing else. I kind of wonder if there's going to be an equipment theme in Shadows over Innistrad, maybe with the humans. There was a light equipment theme in the last Innistrad, so maybe this is just a prelude to that. I'm kind of thinking that might be what this is, because it does seem like a light smattering of equipment all of a sudden. So that's the first one. Next is a Captain's Claw, and this of course plays well with the previously mentioned cards, but this also plays well with allies. So what's kind of nice about this is you have the ability to get some rally triggers, make some more tokens for cohort. So this is going to play very, very well in those decks, and it's very cheap. 2 to cast, 1 to equip. If you're in that world, this is going to be great for you, but even if you're not, you might get some added value just with some extra 1/1s. Pretty decent card. Chitinous Cloak, and this one's a little pricey for me. I mean, I like that it gives menace, but 3 to cast, 3 to equip, I'm probably not playing this most of the time unless I really have a good reason to in my deck. Hedron Crawler. So, much like one of the previous cards we just looked at, this gives you colorless mana. It only costs 2. It's a little fragile. It's really easy to get rid of. Your opponent, if they know what you're up to with that colorless mana, they may try to get rid of this. So it's a tad fragile, but if you need colorless mana, it is an option for you, and it's common. Seer's Lantern. In some ways, this is a better option. Now, it costs 3 mana, but it's a little harder to get rid of, and when you get to the point where you might not need the mana for a turn or late game, then you also have the ability to use this to scry. That's actually pretty economical for limited. Next is Stoneforged Masterwork, and this is very pushed artifact equipment, 1 to cast, 2 to equip. It's going to be great with any sort of tribal synergy, so you're looking at your allies is the one that of course jumps to mind, but even Eldrazi Scions is another one, and even like your goblins and elves, if you have a few of those in your deck, this could be quite good. So keep an eye out for this. This is going to be a house when you get it in limited. As far as other formats go, I don't know where it fits into standard. Like, I feel like there is a ally deck, but I feel like it's more a Rally the Ancestors deck and not really just straightforward allies, but that could change in the future, especially when Rally does eventually rotate out, so keep an eye on it there. Is it fast enough for things like Modern Elves? I don't know. I mean, Modern Elves are pretty quick as it is. I don't know if they need this, but someone will try it out. Maybe you'll get there. Another place where you could play this, though, is Commander, and also some tribal cube strategies would be neat as well, so this has a lot of uses. Strider Harness. This is another reprint, and again, it's just kind of run-of-the-mill equipment. It's equipment for the sake of equipment. This one costs 3, so even though it's only 1 to equip, I don't feel good paying 3 for this. I would be very hard-pressed to put this one in my limited deck. Now let's move on to the lands, and the first one is Cinder Barrens. You're actually going to see as we go through the lands, there's a cycle of 5 allied color comes into play tapped lands, and this of course is the red-black one. Now, when these were leaked, people weren't super excited about this, especially the fact that it was at the uncommon level. I mean, we've seen this type of thing before. We've seen better cards since. So, I mean, people were kind of down on these. Here's the bottom line, though. I'm sure they play tested the limited environment, and they figured out, you know what? We need some color fixing at the uncommon level. So, here you go. There they are. One comment on one of the spoiler videos I thought was very good, and I wish I remember who said it now, so I apologize, but they brought up the fact that it was a shame they wasted such great art on these cards that aren't going to see a whole lot of play outside of limited. I mean, sure, you'll play them in your sealed pool, you'll play them in draft, but after that, you're going to throw them in a box somewhere and probably never look at them again. And they really do have some nice art on them, so kind of sad they couldn't find something better to use this art on. But here you go. Here's Cinder Barrens, and we'll see the other 4 as we move forward. Corrupted Crossroads. This is a rare, so you won't see it all the time, but it is dedicated colorless mana. If you need that in your limited deck, well, there it is. The second ability, it's good if you're playing Devoid, especially black-red Devoid, or maybe black-red-green Devoid. That helps you a little bit, but if you're not playing a lot of Devoid, it's not super great. So kind of is what it is. It's going to fit in as a necessity in some decks. Next is Crumbling Vestige, and I don't know about this one. I feel like this could be good, or I feel like this could be not good. That's not a very good evaluation, I know, but it comes into play tapped, but you get a mana of any color. You kind of have that like Lotus Cobra thing going on for one turn, and then after that it gives you dedicated colorless mana. So some decks are going to want the dedicated colorless mana. Some decks are going to want the multicolor because they're playing multiple colors, trying to do ally strategies and stuff. So it kind of fits into a lot of different decks. So this might be a card that gets drafted by a lot of different people at the table. It's common, so there'll be a few of them running around, but I find it just very intriguing, very interesting card. I'm going to go out on a limb and say perhaps standard playable, just because it's going to give you a chance to hit different colors when it comes into play. But yeah, I definitely want to try this in limited. Hissing Quagmire. So this is the Golgari creature land, and it's actually pretty good. It only costs 3 to activate. I do like that a lot, and you get a 2/2 death touch effect out of it. Really makes your opponent think about attacking into you when you have this sitting there, especially when you have open mana. It can slow down the game a little bit, and I think it's strong enough to perhaps see some standard play, but it's definitely going to be very, very useful in limited for you. Hold Out Settlement. This one's another one that's intriguing to me because it's basically a free Springleaf Drum, and Springleaf Drum does see modern play. I mean, it's in some builds of the Tron deck. Could this just replace that card in that deck? I don't know, maybe. I do want to try this out. Again, this is a great way to get multiple colors, and at the same time, it's a great way to get colorless mana. So again, much like the last card we talked about a few minutes ago, kind of does both. This one's at the common level, and it might be very sought after in a draft. Meandering River. So here's the Azorius, comes into play tapped land. Mirror Pool. So this one is a mythic, and this is interesting. Now, obviously, it's nice because it does give you, again, dedicated colorless. But if you have some colorless, it can also do some other shenanigans. It can fork one of your spells, or it can clone one of your creatures. That's actually pretty powerful. So I could definitely see myself playing this in limited, being very happy. I don't know where it really fits into, say, standard. The fact that it forks one of your spells is cool, but it doesn't fork an opponent's spell. I feel like that's a little bit, I'm sure that was worded that way for simplicity, but I feel like that weakens it a little bit. But yeah, keep an eye on this one. I'm really not sure where it fits, but I'd probably be happy to play it in limited. Needle Spires. So here's the Boros Man land. Now this one costs 4 to activate. 2/1 is very fragile. I don't know. This one doesn't feel as great to me. It's still good in limited, I think. I would still play it there and be okay with it, but especially if I needed the color fixing. But I don't know. It's not one of my favorites. I just feel like it could die a little too easy, and then not only am I out the creature, but I'm also out a land that gives me 2 colored sources. So kind of is middle of the road for me. Runes of Oran Reef. So this one's interesting. Again, dedicated colorless mana. This might be good in the black-red aggro deck, considering a lot of those creatures are devoid creatures, and you might be able to play some cheap creatures, still have this out on the battlefield to make them a little bigger, and give you a little bit of an advantage to press faster. So I think this is really for that deck. So because of that, it might not be great in a lot of limited builds, but it'd be alright in that one for sure. Seagate Wreckage. Yet again, here's another way to get colorless mana, but this one is very interesting because when you do run out of cards, and we've all been there, the old draw go, now you can pay a colorless and 2 to draw a card. That's actually very good. It's not always going to be relevant, and it's not always going to make a difference in your games, but that's okay because it's also giving you colorless mana. So if you're in the market for that, that might just be good enough, and if you get the extra card draw, even better. I think this is good enough to play in standard, where you have a little more control over what types of cards you're playing, and it's probably a little easier to empty your hand, but it's still going to be good in limited as well, so keep an eye out on this one. Submerged Boneyard. So here's the Dimir, comes into play tap land, followed by Timber Gorge, which is the Gruul one. And then the last of the 5, a Tranquil Expanse, which is the Selesnya one. Next we have Unknown Shores. This was a reprint as well from Theros. And again, I can see this being highly contested in a draft. It just is what a lot of different decks want to do. It's either colorless mana or an ability to get a mana of any color. So again, this will be very good in limited. And we come to our last creature land, and this is the Is It one. I like this one a lot. Now, this one costs 4 to activate, which is a little more, but you get a 1/4, which can also become a 4/1. So I like that a lot. That's actually pretty awesome, especially if you get some counters on this thing. This thing can become kind of big and hard to deal with rather quickly. So I like this one. I think it's good enough to see some standard play. Any of the ones that are in the control colors are probably better, just because you have things like board sweeps that they can survive and then perhaps get in there. And this one can get in there for some significant damage as well. So keep an eye out for this one. Also a very good limited card, obviously. And our last card of the day is the new basic land, Wastes. So a couple things you need to know about this. Obviously, they give you dedicated colorless mana. However, you can only play with the ones that you open in your sealed pool or that you actively draft. You cannot go to the land station and pick up a bunch of wastes and stick them in your deck like you can swamps, for example. They just don't work that way. So they're a little different, but like a basic land, you can obviously have more than 4 in your deck. If you're playing constructed, you can have as many as you need. And as far as their frequency in packs for limited, they're going to be printed at double the rate of common. So basically each piece of art you see there on the left will be in the common slot, so you have double the chance of getting them than any other common. So you want to keep that in mind as you evaluate them during a draft, for example. Same as constructed, of course. Commander, you can use more than 4 of these in your deck. So those are the wastes, and we'll talk a little bit more about them tomorrow in the pre-release primer and give you a little more detail. But we made it. Those are all the cards in Oath of the Gatewatch. So tomorrow we'll be back with a pre-release primer. We're going to talk about the mechanics, we're going to talk about some of the archetypes, and we're also going to talk about all the expeditions that are in the set. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.